Hello, Blake Rudis here of Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and today I want to show you how you can use the adjustment brushes in either Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, for you Lightroom users out there, so that you can make awesome dodging and burning adjustments with the adjustment brushes. So here's our after, and here's our before. Bare bones, basic, tone mapped image straight out of Photomatix. Brought it into your Adobe Camera Raw, didn't do anything else but these dodging and burning techniques to bring out some depth in the photo. So let's go ahead and jump into this because I've got a lot of awesome stuff to share with you. Okay, so here we are in Adobe Camera Raw to talk about dodging and burning. Now you can do this in either Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom because they both have the same basic module, okay? So to do the dodging and burning in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, I'm going to be in the actual adjustment brush setting. So here's the basic setting. I'm going to go over to the adjustment brush setting. So before we get into dodging and burning, I've done a lot of Photoshop tutorials on this, but now I'm going to show you something about how you can do it in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. What is dodging and burning? So just a quick rundown on dodging and burning. Dodging and burning was typically something done in the analog film days where you'd be in the darkroom and you needed to maybe make a certain area of your photo lighter or darker. So you would either dodge or burn. When you dodged that area, you actually made that area lighter. And when you burned that area, you made it darker. Now, how did you do this? Well, typically, the way it worked in the darkroom is you would expose the paper longer to make it darker, which is opposite of how we record on a sensor. On a sensor, you record for longer to make it brighter. So burning, you'd be burning more time onto that page to make that certain area darker. And likewise, you'd be dodging certain areas on that page so that they didn't get as much light to make them brighter or not as dark as the burned areas. That's where the term dodging and burning comes from. It's a little bit opposite of what we know in the digital world here, but the tradition still remains the same. So if you've never worked in the analog world, I can tell you this. Dodging and burning was a severe pain in the butt. One of those things that when you were told, hey, you should probably dodge that or burn that, I was like, man, I got to go back in the darkroom, make another print and dodge it and burn it. It was a pain because you could never get it just right, especially when you're just learning. It took a lot of skill in order to get it right. Now, if it's not right, we just delete it. We move on. So in order to get this dodging and burning done, we have to make our brushes first. So I'm going to make specific brushes for dodging and for burning. Let's start with dodging, and we'll go plus 25 here. So we're going to go plus 0.25 on the exposure. Contrast, it's always a good idea to add a little bit more contrast into those areas that you're dodging and burning because sometimes they can get washed out and the color starts to fade, the tone starts to fade, and the contrast slider here is going to help us add some of that tone and color back in without oversaturating it by using the saturation slider. Highlights and shadows, we will leave those alone for now, but we can go back to those and use those independently. And whites, we're going to go to plus 10 on the whites. It's also a good idea to go a little bit plus 10 on the clarity because as you wash that area out with your dodging and burning, sometimes you can reduce some of the detail in there. So by adding that little bit of clarity, it helps. So we're going to call this the dodge tool. So we need to go to a new local correction setting and call this dodge. That's going to set us up for making a certain area of our photo brighter. So now let's reset these and let's make that next area and call it burn. So we're going to make that next brush, call it burn, move this down to negative 0.25. We're basically doing the exact opposite of what we did with the other one. We're going to go to plus 5 again with the contrast, leave highlight shadows alone, leave the whites alone this time, and this time in the blacks we're going to go to negative 10 to make any of those black areas darker, and then clarity we'll go to plus 10. So this is going to set us up for our burn tool. So we're going to go to that new local correction setting and we're going to call this burn. Now you can see I've actually made some other brushes in the past. You can see this one here called William's Eyes. My son has these really crazy eyes where the outside of them is blue and the inside of them has this little kind of brown, almost like star flare that comes out of it. It's really crazy. He's only not even 2 yet, so I hope that color doesn't fade because he has really interesting eyes. But now what I've done is every time I take a portrait of him or a photo of him, I know that I can zoom into his eye, click that brush, and just brush right around his eye and get that pop that my son's eyes have to him. It's pretty cool when you save these brushes like that because you can always go back into them and select them whenever you want. So I'm going to start with the burn tool. But before we begin, it's probably a good idea to stop for a second and talk about the benefits of dodging and burning in Lightroom as opposed to dodging and burning in Photoshop. So I don't really want this to be a battle between Photoshop and Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw, not by any stretch of the imagination. Let's just talk about the benefits. So with Photoshop, your benefits are the Wacom sensitivity. That as you brush, it actually caters to the sensitivity of how hard you push on the tablet. So with that being said, if you have a very harsh dodge selected and you press really hard, it'll make that whole area almost like white. But if you just barely press, it'll just barely add that. So that's a very awesome benefit that's in Photoshop versus Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. You have the ability to work in layers. That makes it really easy to duplicate your dodge and burn and actually add multiple different dodge and burn layers with that layer idea and that layer mentality. Always going to be a strong suit in Photoshop. Masking, again, you can do some really creative and clever things with those masks while you dodge and burn. So that actually is very helpful to have not just the mask like you see here in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, but to actually have that mask almost on its own layer. So it's a lot easier to edit it. Blending options, those are extremely powerful when you're dodging and burning, to use those blending options. But we have ways that we can do that in Adobe Camera Raw as well. And there are also multiple methods for dodging and burning in Photoshop. There are hundreds of methods for dodging and burning in Photoshop, from curves, adjustment layers, to levels, to the actual dodge and burn tools that are in Photoshop, to different types of plugins and programs that are out there. There are many ways to do some localized dodging and burning in something like Photoshop. Now, the benefits of Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. You actually have a lot more accurate control over the tone and color of the areas that you are dodging and burning. So it actually becomes more of an adjustment, a helpful adjustment than the typical dodge and burn idea, because within that dodge and burn paint stroke, you can add your exposure, your contrast, your highlights, your shadows, your whites, your blacks, your clarity, all within one stroke, which is a lot harder to control in something like Photoshop. You have the color control. You can add more temperature to those areas that you're dodging and burning. So let's say like in this picture, like you're going to see here in a little bit, I'm actually going to use this technique on the water, on the rocks in the foreground to take away the blue that's kind of shining and reflecting off of there, right there with the color temperatures. It's point and brush based. So as you point and click and brush, you create new brushes, which can be beneficial and detrimental all at the same time. It's beneficial because you can make multiple different adjustments a lot easier with your dodging and burning, but you can also lose yourself in just how many point and brush selections you're making all over your image. And it's a lot easier to adjust the strength in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom. So in Photoshop, you have the ability to use the Wacom tablet for your strength and the opacity sliders for your strength. But here in Adobe Camera Raw, you actually get the exposure slider, the contrast slider, the highlight slider, the shadows, whites, blacks, clarity, saturation. I mean, the list goes on and on to what you can actually do for each one of those. So let's jump back into Adobe Camera Raw and I'll go over this with you. All right, so now that we've got some of those benefits out of the way of dodging and burning in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, let's actually show how some of those benefits really do benefit us by actually doing it. All right, so now we've got the burn tool selected. I can tell because the negative 0.25 and the negative 10 in the blacks. And I'm just going to start painting in areas that I want to be darker. Now you can see when I do this, it adds a little point here because that's where I started this brush. I started it right here, but I can't see anything. So my suggestion is to actually go down here to where it says mask and click that button and also click the auto mask. And the auto mask will help you so that you're not just brushing random sprays of big area there. Okay, so it's staying confined to certain things. It does help to have the auto mask on. You can turn it off if you'd like. If you're making more tedious selections and you don't want to fight the auto mask, turn it off, but for this sake I'll leave it on. Now in the mask, I have mine set to magenta. By default, it's a different color in Adobe Camera Raw. I can't remember what it is, but I set mine to magenta because there's not a lot of colors in an image that are typically magenta, so it's a lot easier to see that. If I set that to red, if I'm painting on a red area, well, it's hard to see. It's very rare that we see magenta in the image, and that's why I choose magenta. So I'm going to choose add, and as I add, I'm going to just brush along this edge to make this whole edge darker. All right, and then I'm going to do that right along here too. I'm going to make this area darker. You see it's kind of dodging these highlight areas there, and that's okay because it's really only targeting those black areas now, which is actually kind of nice. So that's another benefit here, is that auto mask can target specific black areas. So if you see, I can't really tell what I'm doing here. So I'll take that mask off and I'll turn this looking layer on and off here. The great thing about this is that you get the ability to adjust the highlights and the shadows right here within that dodge and burn area. So here we'll click on that area, and let's say we want to maintain the highlight areas and not have them be burned. Well, we can pull this highlight up now. So those highlight areas that you see up here are not being affected by what we burned. So that's a really easy way to resurrect those areas. We can also maybe make those shadow areas a little bit darker. If we want to move a little bit faster with this, we can make those black areas a little bit more black. So we get a really dark area there. Now, I take caution to go too black too quick, okay? So I would probably just stick with something like that. Now, if we wanted to maintain this same burn tool that we're using here, we would just click on this, make sure this is set to add, and this will add more burning to any other area. We don't have to have the mask on now because we kind of know exactly what we're going to be, what we want to target now. Now, if I wanted to make a new burn layer, what I would suggest you do is actually press this new button. Maybe we don't want all those same settings there. And with that new button selected, I'm going to go back to that burn tool. And now I'm reset back to my old burn settings. So if we didn't want those other burn settings to be quite as harsh, we know that this one is the harsh burn and this one is the light burn. All right, so we'll just add more of that light burn right up here. And then maybe we can do this light burn kind of down here. So that looks pretty good. Now let's switch on over to our dodge tool. Before I do that, I'm going to burn some areas up here. It's just one of those things, I see it and I got to do it. I see it and I got to do it. And then some of these areas over here too. I'll just burn these in. Okay. And if I wanted those, again, if I wanted those to move a little bit quicker, maybe make those shadow areas in those areas a little bit darker, and then maybe resurrect those highlights in there. So those highlights still get maintained. So here's the before and after for our burn. So it looks really good. Now let's go into our dodge. All right. So we'll make a new brush and we'll go to the dodge tool. So with the dodge tool selected, I want to do anything that is like this white here. I want this waterfall to actually look white. So I'm going to make a mask here so I can see that mask. I'm going to paint right on this so I know that I'm affecting the waterfall and really nothing outside of it. And if I do go a little bit outside, I can always resurrect those with that shadows slider later. So I'm just dodging this area out, dodging this because I want it to get lighter. Let's see, let's take my mask off and see exactly what this did. So we'll turn that on and off, okay? And maybe I want this to be, those highlight areas to be a little bit brighter, okay? Maybe I want those black areas that are within those shadow areas to be a little bit darker. Maybe I want those black areas when they're to be really dark and then increase those white areas. So you see, I'm actually, not only am I dodging and burning, but I'm maintaining that really fine local contrast. So when I do dodging and burning in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, it's usually for very specific purposes. It's very pinpoint, very targeted. I know that I want certain areas to be lighter or darker, but I don't want it to affect certain areas that are within there. So I don't want certain areas to get, I don't want the dark areas within those light areas to get lighter. All right, now I've got complete control over those dark areas within those light areas by making this type of dodge and burn as opposed to a blanket dodge and burn in something like Photoshop. So if we look at the complete before and the complete after, you can see that even this photo where I've done really no work to it. I haven't done any work outside of the dodging and burning. I tone mapped it really quickly in Photomatics just to get a baseline type of image that I could work on. And now I'm going from there. So let's say there's some other areas that I want to maybe add some of that same exact dodging to and bring out some of the white in these rocks. The white in these rock faces was actually pretty incredible. So you can see that as I'm bringing out the white in these rocks, I'm also bringing out some of that detail because of that clarity that I've got selected there. But it's also working really harshly on those shadow areas. So that would be one of those cases where I'd probably have to drop this shadow area down a little bit, drop that black area down a little bit, and maybe even have been making a different dodge selection tool. So maybe I should have just gone with another dodge selection tool completely. But it's also not that big of a deal. Let's say that you create that layer, and you have a little bit of overspray here, so you don't want this area selected. If I press Alt or Option, that'll actually allow me to take certain areas away that I didn't want to paint on. All right, so it kind of helps me get some of those areas back. So if you did a little too much to something, you just press that Alt or Option key, and that will help you with that overspray, is what I like to call it, like in the spray painting world. Let's turn those masks off. This is the after, and this is the before. Now you can get really creative with this too by creating new adjustment brushes. When we go into that Dodge tool, make sure we have that Dodge tool selected. We have a brand new Dodge tool selected with none of those previous settings. Let's say I want to dodge these areas because I want them to be a little bit brighter. But you notice that there's a lot of blue in that. Well, you can also change the color temperature, so we can make that a little bit warmer. So not only do we have complete control over tone, we are also gaining some control over color by going into the saturation in those areas and also going into the color temperature in those areas. So we take away the blue from those rocks and we add a little bit of that magenta and a little bit of that brown to take away that blue area and really kind of bring out some of the color that's in there while we're dodging and burning. All right, so I could literally go all day dodging and burning this image in Adobe Camera Raw. You've seen the benefits here. You have a lot more local benefit from dodging and burning in Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw. I highly suggest you make those brushes. Those brushes will really help you in this process, the dodge brush and the burn brush, so you can always refer to them whenever you need them, because it's not just about adding a little bit of exposure. You got to throw the contrast in there, a little bit of clarity in there, and that will definitely help you along on your way. So my name is Blake Rudis with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com. If you like this, please share it, comment on it, and subscribe, because every single Friday I'm putting out a new tutorial on my YouTube page. I just hit my 200th tutorial last week. This is 201. So if you subscribe, you will see them in your inbox. Thank you very much for watching this, and thank you for sharing and subscribing. I really appreciate it.